Okay, folks, welcome to UCM Talks tonight. And as I say, every time when we're online, sitting cozily on home like a night like this, if ever we needed vindication that doing these talks online is a good idea at this time of year, I think look out your window and you'll see that. But also, I think particularly in keeping with tonight's talk, we're not adding to the carbon footprint by traveling anywhere to listen to Fiona. We can make use of this marvelous technology. So welcome to what's the fourth talk in our 2022-23 series, which in fact is our fifth series. The idea of UCM Talks is they're public lectures to create platform for meaningful discussions, for sharing new ideas. And they are incredibly, those of you who've looked at the schedule, eclectic, but that's quite deliberate. The thing that holds them together, the unifying fact, is that all the talks are from people who are either doing research on the island or based on the island or some variation of that there. But other than that, these talks talk about all sorts of things, and tonight's is no exception. If you've not been to a UCM talk before, the first thing I need to tell you is that we record them so that we've got them and we can then pop them onto the UCM website. And so that means it's entirely up to you whether you have your camera on or off. And if you want to ask questions, generally what we do is we let our talker talk and then ask questions at the end. But please use the chat box along the way if there's anything that you really want to get clarified there and then as the talk progresses. So to tonight's talker, which is Dr. Fiona Gell, Marine Conservation and Climate Change Policy Specialist and Writer. And Fiona is a great friend of UCM. She has for many, many years contributed to our students and to our curriculum with guest lectures and all sorts of other activities. And so it was no surprise that she was our very first UCM Honorary Fellow back in 2017. And Fiona's been assisting with championing and looking out for the island's environment in various government posts since 2004. And before that was on some very exotic research posts in Mozambique and the British Virgin Islands. And all of this started back in 1995 when Fiona gained her first of many educational qualifications, which was a biology degree. Tonight's talk, and I'll be handing over to Fiona straight away, is titled Ocean Climate Solutions, How Taking Good Care of the Sea Can Help Build a Better Future for Everyone. So thank you, Fiona, and here we go.
Thank you very much, Gail, and thank you for asking me to do this lecture. It's a great pleasure.
We've got people coming in. I think there's a bus arrived somewhere, so we'll just hang on. We'll just let them come in a ruddy blush. Okay. I think that's it for now. For those of you who've just arrived, I won't repeat the welcome, but I will say, if you're not familiar with the UCM talks, we do record them so that the presentation will go onto the UCM website. So generally what happens is that the talker will talk for about 40 minutes, then there'll be questions and answers, but please do use the chat box if you want to ask anything as the presentation from Dr. Fiona Gell goes. But given the time, we're going to crack straight into it now. So thank you, Fiona.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Best Mai. And as Gail said, I'm going to be talking this evening a bit about how taking good care of the sea can help build a better future for everyone. So just a quick overview of what I'm going to be talking about. First of all, why I care about the sea, and Gail just gave a little bit of a background of how I got involved in marine conservation, but I'll talk a little bit more about that. Then why the sea is important, some of the threats to our ocean, and then crucially some of the solutions and some of the real reasons for hope. And then finally I want to talk a bit about how you can help. So very briefly, I'm not going to be talking a huge amount about my own research this evening, but I do have a research background, and that's been very focused. Initially, it was on fish and fisheries and fish biology, and I'm still a big fish fan. So here was just some of the species that I've been involved in studying, from tiny larval snappers right up to basking sharks. And a lot of my research around fish has also been around fisheries and the management of the management and conservation of fish. So it's been quite applied. I've also done a lot of research into the design and function of marine protected areas. So they are areas of the sea which are protected from damaging impacts, and they bring a wider range of benefits. And what I did a lot of research on in 2 postdoctoral positions after I finished my PhD was on how, if you can design a marine protected area in the right way, it doesn't just benefit marine life, it also benefits fishermen and the fishing communities that rely on those areas. So I'm going to be talking a bit more about marine protected areas later on, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of that context. And then I went from a research background in marine protected areas to having the opportunity to actually put that research into practice. And that has been a really interesting process. So when I was doing the postdoctoral research, I was working with some of the leading scientists in marine protected area science. I did one of my postdoctoral positions with Professor Callum Roberts, who continues to be one of the really big advocates and leaders in the science of marine protected areas. And then I got the opportunity to come to the Isle of Man, where I grew up, to work on marine protected areas, actually implementing them. And I've also had that experience in a very different, in some ways, system in the Indian Ocean, the island of Rodrigues, which is the island you can see on the slide in the bottom left-hand corner. And that is a tropical island with a coral reef and a huge lagoon, but actually quite interesting, lots of interesting similarities with the Isle of Man. So they were 2 examples of where I was able to take all the insight I got from being as a scientist and researcher and working with international scientists into how marine protected areas worked, how you can protect the sea effectively, and take that and actually put it into practice. So that's, I've got a kind of mixture of that kind of theoretical and practical approach to looking after the ocean. And I guess to put that in context as well, I've got a very personal connection with the sea, and I think that's something that I think probably all of you that are, you've joined this call, it's probably because you have some interest and passion about the sea. And really, as humans, we all have a connection, whether direct or indirect, with the sea. And so mine comes from growing up on the Isle of Man and in a family. My dad's family were fishermen, and from a very early age, loving the sea, loving rock pools and loving fish, and just a real passion for the sea. And so I was very lucky to then take that through to be able to, as Gail said, study biology at university and then go on to do my PhD in marine biology and eventually come back and put that into use in the Isle of Man. So I've talked a bit about why I love the sea, but the ocean is a wonderful thing. So the Earth is 70% ocean, and this you may have seen this map before. It's been used quite a lot recently, and the Spillhouse World Ocean Map, which is an ocean-centric world map, which just shows just the enormity of the ocean, but also how interconnected it is, so that we're all connected by this big global ocean. There is enormous diversity in the ocean, so nobody knows how many species there are, and some estimates suggest that maybe 90% of the species in the ocean haven't even been discovered yet, because so much of the deep seas haven't been explored. And so some estimates, it varies a lot depending on how you look at it, but there could be well over 2 million species in the ocean. And 80% of the ocean is unmapped and unexplored. And there's, often you hear people saying that we know the surface of the moon better than we know the depths of the ocean, because it's very difficult to get there and very difficult to explore. And so we've only explored very small areas of it. But the ocean has a critical role in our function, the function of the planet. And many people, again, describe it as part of our life support system. So 50% of the planet's oxygen comes from the ocean, and 25% of our carbon emissions are absorbed by the ocean. So a healthy, functioning ocean is essential for all aspects of life on Earth. And so without that, we're in trouble, really. So it's really, I suppose, really important to appreciate the ocean as an essential part of our survival system. The other part of the wonder of the ocean is a bit of what I was kind of talking about a bit at the beginning, that if you stand, this is a picture from December and the Isle of Man on the west coast, and it's a freezing cold day, but the spray's coming up, and just that wonder of the ocean, that connection you feel, not thinking about all the millions of species or the chemistry of it or anything, but just seeing the ocean. It means such a lot to so many of us, and and that ocean spray and that proximity to the sea, it's not just something nice and something inspiring. It's also now being proven to actually bring about mental health benefits, physical health benefits, and we can't underestimate that importance and that kind of emotional connection we have with it. So I'm going to be talking a lot of statistics and the more of the kind of technical side of things later on, but a lot of it does come back to this real connection that we have to the ocean. And building on that, the other source of wonder is based on the kind of diversity we have. So I'm sure some of you watched the new BBC series with David Attenborough, Wild Isles, a few evenings ago, and saw the amazing footage of the orca and the seals and the diving gannets, and just the amazing beauty and wonder of the marine life that we have around the British Isles. And this again is a source of connection and appreciation of how wonderful and how important the ocean is. And so my slide here is of a basking shark, and that for me has been a real source of wonder in Manx seas. So that, I think, going back to that and thinking about your own connection is really important. So the reality is, though, that we're living in the midst of a climate emergency and an ecological emergency. The temperatures and the mean temperatures around the world are consistently being recorded as the highest on record. So we're having year after year which recording the highest temperatures on record, and the impacts are already being very clearly seen around the world, and they're very unfairly distributed. Some places are being devastated by floods and droughts and heat waves, and other areas are relatively unaffected, but we'll be seeing more effects in the future. And this is obviously impacting on people and also all aspects of life, but it is also having an impact on the ocean, which I'm going to be talking a bit more about. So some of the impacts on the ocean, there's a great, if you're interested in getting more details on it, there's a really good IPCC report on the specific impacts of climate change on the cryosphere. So that's the kind of the ice areas, the ice caps and glaciers and so on, and the ocean as a result of climate change. And I'm not going to go into massive detail here, but I'll just talk about some of the kind of big physical impacts, which you'll be aware of most of them, but maybe not some of the more specific ones. So obviously with increasing global temperatures, the ice sheets are melting. We're seeing a decrease in the kind of area of ice sheets available, and the total cover of ice is reducing. The sea temperature is increasing, and that's something that the Isle of Man has made an important contribution to in terms of the over 100 years of records of sea temperature that came from the Port Eyre Marine Laboratory. The sea level is rising as well, and so that's changing obviously the amount of the amount and the kind of nature of coastal areas. So that's impacting on coastal marine species and coastal land species as well. Then the amount of oxygen in the ocean is decreasing, and this is something that obviously oxygen is essential for us on land, and it's essential for marine life as well. And so as oxygen levels decrease, that's becomes problematic. And also the ocean is becoming more acidic, so the pH of the ocean is decreasing, and the waters are becoming more acidic, and that has a whole range of impacts, but particularly around how a lot of animals that have shells that they lay down, like shelled animals that we're more familiar with, the big ones, but also particularly importantly, a lot of tiny plankton have laid down a shell, and the changing chemistry of the ocean is making it more difficult for these species to lay their shell down properly, or for it to be as strong and as necessary. So these are just some of the kind of physical impacts that increasing sea temperatures are having, increasing global temperatures are having on the sea and on on coastal areas. Then the ecological implications of this are that as temperatures increase, then species are moving into the areas that previously were colder, so in both directions towards the poles. And critically, plankton is responding in a different way. So there is a really important balance between plankton blooming in spring in more temperate areas, and then when, for example, fish spawn and their eggs hatch and become part of the plankton, and all this has to kind of match for the fish or the other species to become successfully, to reproduce successfully and to thrive. But now all this is changing because of the changing temperatures and so on. And then the decrease in oxygen and the increasing acidification are also having an impact on the upwellings, which is where very nutrient-rich waters are increasing in some of the coastal areas around the world, and this is having an impact on productivity. So these are just a few examples, but if you're interested in this, do have a look at the IPCC report. It's incredibly in depth, and it gives you a really amazing evidence base for all the information that is presented. This is just one example of the unexpected consequences as well of the impact of climate change on the ocean. And this is just around a paper that was published last year that looked at how the impacts of climate change with the acidification, the absorption of carbon dioxide, the reduction in oxygen, could all be having an impact on the impact that pollution, and particularly on contaminants in the marine environment, potentially making them more damaging as well. So the amount of contaminants could be increased because of things like additional flooding and wildfires and heat dust storms associated with heat waves, and that could be increasing the amount of contamination in the ocean and also increasing the damaging effects of it. So this is just one example of the sort of unexpected and really as yet really not very well understood consequences. So there's been an awful lot of discussion, and the news is now picking up much more on the climate emergency. And in the last year or so, the ecological emergency has been highlighted much more widely as well. And I'm just giving an example, last year's Living Planet report from the World Wildlife Fund, the WWF in the UK. And this report really highlighted just where things were, how dire things were, really, in terms of the impact of human impacts on biodiversity. So for wildlife populations which are monitored, they found a 69% decrease between 1970 and 2018. And there are so many different examples of this, and we've seen examples locally, but there's lots of international examples of how we've lost so many species, and the species that we have left, the biomass, the number of them has decreased immensely. And we're at a situation where many ecosystems are on the point of collapse, and it is a real crisis and emergency, and it's very, very linked to the climate emergency as well. So very soon, if we can't reduce our emissions, we'll see climate change becoming the main source of biodiversity loss, on top of all the other things that we're doing to the environment. And so there is now a really good recognition that at the highest levels that the ecological emergency and the climate emergency are linked, and they have to be dealt with. But a lot still needs to be done in terms of actually making progress with these. And I would recommend this report to get a much better insight into some of these challenges if you're interested. And again, just going back to the Wild Isles programme this week, it celebrated the beauty and diversity of the biodiversity of the British Isles, but it also highlighted how how bad things are getting as well. So David Attenborough says in the programme, though rich in places, Britain as a whole is one of the most nature depleted places in the world, and this applies to the whole of the British Isles really. And there has been quite a lot of work on this in terms of again this comes from the WWF report, and the darker the area on this world map, the lighter the area, the closer to the yellow and orange, the more impact there has been on the ecosystem. So it shows the British Isles is very yellow and pink, which indicates a high level of impact. And then the areas which are very dark have been the least impacted by people and are closest to the kind of natural functioning ecosystems that they had. So in terms of the marine environment, there are often acknowledged to be 5 main threats. So I've talked a lot about the climate impact, but this exacerbates existing threats that have been going on for a long time, and they all interact. And so overall, there is a real issue with the cumulative impacts of climate and then all the other things that we're doing to the marine environment. So fishing is a well known and documented impact that people are concerned about, but a lot of measures have been put in place, particularly around the Isle of Man. I think there's been a lot of effort in terms of reducing the impact of fisheries, but globally it is one of the main sources of impact, particularly fishing methods which damage the seabed, like trawling and dredging. So I'm going to be talking a bit more later though about how important fisheries are in terms of livelihoods and nutrition as well. The other main source of impact is the loss of habitat. So when we do coastal or marine developments, we lose habitat. When we fish in particular ways, we lose habitat. And there are many different impacts on seabed and on the coastal environment, which leads to habitats being lost. And I'm going to be talking a bit more about just how important habitats are. The other impact, and it's a bit a random photo, but the photo is of me holding up some seaweed in a rock pool in Castletown, and that's it's called wireweed, and it was first recorded in the Isle of Man in about 2005, and it's actually originally from Japan, but it's an invasive species, so it's now very, very common around the coast of the Isle of Man, and it's thought to outcompete species of seaweed, but also in some places it outcompetes eelgrass, which is, again, I'm going to be talking a bit more about later on. And so, but there are much worse examples than this of species that as humans we've taken around the world, and when they get to another place, they've caused a big problem. So another example of that in the Irish Sea is something called the carpet sea squirt, which is once it takes hold, it grows really rapidly, and it's been a massive problem in marinas around the Irish Sea, where it's cost millions of pounds to remove because it clogs up infrastructure and boat engines and so on. But globally, invasive species are a big problem. And again, one that's been in the news that you might have heard about is the lionfish invasion of the Caribbean, where very beautiful lionfish, which have lots of beautiful frondy fins, have come from the Pacific, but they're very voracious predators, and they've had a massive impact on the local population. So there's actually a bounty on their heads, and people go out and fish for them to try and reduce the numbers. And then the final one I've got here is it's pollution, and I mentioned a little bit just then about contaminants, but there's the obvious things like oil spills and oil pollution, but we pollute the sea in many different ways. So from the water that runs off from rivers and streams going through our agricultural land, for example, from industrial waste, from the things that we put down our own toilets and sinks, from cleaning products, pharmaceuticals. It's an increasing problem. The sea is becoming very polluted with all the pharmaceuticals that come through the sewage system. So all of these things are interacting and making it very challenging for marine ecosystems. But going back to the value of the ocean, the biodiversity is amazing. And as I mentioned, we don't know just how biodiverse the ocean is, but we have just this wealth of species. And so in the Isle of Man, we have an amazing, people are often really amazed at just the diversity of life we have in our waters. And I could talk about that. I could, a whole other presentation about just the wonder of what we've got. But I mean, this is from the CITES website, but it just gives you, a global biodiversity overview of some of the amazing species, like huge basking sharks and whale sharks, right down to tiny little sea anemones. And that's something we have a lot of diversity of in Manx waters, for example. But biodiversity is looked at in 3 different ways. So it can be what you'd probably think of straight away as the biodiversity of species, so how many species you have in a particular area. But you also have biodiversity, genetic diversity. So one species may have very different genetic variants in different parts of their range. And then there's also ecosystem diversity. So how these species assemble themselves into different communities and create ecosystems. And that's a different type of biodiversity as well. So you can have, a reef type habitat that's dominated by the same species, but in different places. And then that can be a totally different community. So biodiversity it's amazing, and it's very high in the sea and very important. And it brings us a lot of benefits. So I've talked a little bit about the impacts of climate change, and one of the impacts that has already been seen in the marine environment has been coral bleaching. And there is some evidence that coral bleaching, there are some species of coral which are much more resilient to temperature changes or to particular conditions, particular combinations of threats. And so if you can maintain biodiversity, it's likely that you can have a more resilient system, so that when you have catastrophic impacts like climate change or other impacts, then some of those species will be able to survive. So that diversity is really important. The other argument that's often given for biodiversity is that we need to make sure that we keep as many of the different nuts and bolts that are keeping the ecosystems functioning as possible. And there's that analogy with taking an aeroplane apart and putting it back together again, and how if you put it back together again, there's some bolts missing, you probably wouldn't feel very happy flying that plane. That we need to make sure that we have all the different parts so that our ecosystem functions properly. And then there are much more practical uses, which I'm going to talk a bit more about later, but one that a good example is pharmaceuticals. So we're beginning, particularly as we're exploring the deep sea, we're finding that species like sponges and corals and so on have very, very novel and interesting bacteria and associated substances which are being used in cures or treatments for a whole range of different life-threatening illnesses. And so there's so many reasons to keep all these beautiful species. So a really good reason for looking after the ocean, in addition to some of the things I've been talking to you about in terms of the ecosystem function and climate change, is around the value of the ocean to supply food. And this is something that's been quite controversial. Some of you might have seen the Sea Legacy film on Netflix, which was very sort of anti-fishing, I suppose, and anti-seafood. But there's another side to this, in that seafood and ocean products provide livelihoods to billions of people worldwide, livelihoods and subsistence livings as well. So in places where people will literally go out to fish to feed their family for that day, it's fish and seafood are essential. And 15% at the moment of global animal protein comes from the ocean. And if fisheries and aquaculture can be managed sustainably, there's great scope for very sustainable food sources in the future, which may be much more sustainable than some of the land options. So there's the current great importance of the ocean for sustainable food and livelihoods, but also great potential for the future. And in some of the least developed countries, seafood can be the primary source of protein for as much as half of the population. Obviously, in some small island nations, that can be much higher. And there's some really interesting work, which I won't go into massive detail, but I'm just flagging up in case you're interested in more of that nutrition and public health side of things, there's some brilliant work done by Professor Christina Hicks, and she's done a lot of work around the nutritional value of fish and fisheries, and she's shown in her work that by ensuring that the people, particularly in some of the poorest countries in the world, who currently may have deficiencies in micronutrients that are found in fish, and really big benefits could be found, particularly to young children, in including some locally caught fish in diets. And so, developing food programs and nutrition programs around sustainably caught fish could bring big global public health benefits. So it's, I think, often when people think about eating fish, they think about people, us eating tuna or farmed salmon, or some of the things that we know have potentially very, very big environmental impacts. But then a large proportion of the world's population are eating small amounts of fish that could be very sustainably caught, and that is having a relatively small global impact, but a really big benefit to communities and health. So there is a lot of talk now about the ocean as a climate solution, and I'm just giving this as an example. There are lots and lots of reports that have come out over the past couple of years, I suppose, but this one is by the Ocean Panel, and it's called Ocean Solutions that Benefit People, Nature and the Economy. And this one's very focused on the kind of blue economy, developing a sustainable blue economy. But the one of the kind of taglines around this is the new ocean narrative, and it's about turning the narrative around the ocean from the victim of all our horrible pollution and damage and decades, if not centuries, of not taking care of the ocean, into this vision for the ocean to be a really critical part of a really sustainable future where we tackle climate change and we have sustainable diets, and we have a more this is really important, and I don't really talk about this much later on, but it's a massively important part of this, is an equitable future. So at the moment, the way that we do everything really on Earth is very inequitable, and how the sea is managed is can be very inequitable. So there are examples of very big industrial vessels from developed countries coming and fishing in the waters of small island nations, and there's a lot of disparity between people making a lot of money from the sea and other people who aren't even able to make the most basic of living because of the way that the resources are not managed in an equitable way. So this wheel here from this report is around good protection, sustainability, and everyone benefit. A much more fair benefiting from these actions. And again, if you're interested, I'd recommend having a look at this. And it's I'll talk a bit more about some of the themes in this as I go on. So the first, so I'm going to go through now some of the solutions to some of the problems that I've talked about. So I've just given you that kind of vision of a kind of more sustainable ocean, but just going through some of the practical solutions. So the very first one, and it has to be emphasised, is climate action to reduce emissions. So there is sometimes, I think, a bit of a misunderstanding that nature-based solutions and ocean climate solutions could be an alternative to reducing our emissions, and that we could carry on doing what we're doing, but we just do lots of good nature-based solutions. But actually, this is the first tenet. We have to really change the way that we're creating greenhouse gases, and so all the globe. Well, you'll be well aware of the global targets, and we've got domestic targets now as well, and we've got the climate action plan and various different areas of work in place domestically and internationally to reduce emissions, and that's got to be the first thing. And that's a big task. And so in terms of whatever we do from the nature-based solutions point of view has got to be done hand in hand with reducing the emissions. The second one that I wanted to raise was it's very closely related, but it's that we have to keep fossil fuels in the ground. And this again, this report, some of you might be aware of it, but it's the a roadmap for the global energy sector, and it's by the International Energy Agency. So this isn't Greenpeace or a kind of environmental group. This is the strategic group of international bodies looking at how energy can be provided internationally. So in their 2022 2021 roadmap for net zero by 2050, they said that there's no need for investment in new fossil fuel supply, and that's so that's very clear in terms of no more offshore oil and gas or coal mines should be being approved now, because they've put forward a roadmap that can, so it doesn't require that, and it will derail the attempts to meet our climate targets. And that has got obviously the emissions benefit of not doing that is important for the ocean, but also offshore oil and gas is very damaging to the marine environment, and so there's a double win for the marine environment if you keep fossil fuels in the ground and you don't license new gas or oil projects, and you avoid a whole range of pollution risks and impacts, underwater noise, which is an enormous impact. And I didn't mention that in the context of pollution, but noise pollution is increasingly being recognised as a very, very serious and all pervasive impact on the marine environment. So you avoid a lot of that impact as well. So the next one is one that the Isle of Man is really proactive on, and you can look on the government website, and there's various really good sources of information about the Isle of Man Blue Carbon project, which is really exciting. And I'm just going to very briefly talk about blue carbon, which some of you might be familiar with, but others might not be familiar with the term. But blue carbon is the carbon that's stored in the marine environment, and it's the use of it as a solution is around how we can increase the amount of carbon that's stored and locked away long term in the marine environment. So you may have heard about the work that's going on in the Isle of Man and also in the UK, around restoring seagrass beds, for example. And seagrass beds are an amazing blue carbon hero. So they I'm going to be talking again a bit more about them later, but they store a lot of carbon in their root systems. And then internationally, so locally we have eelgrass meadows and salt marshes, which are able to store very high concentrations of carbon, they can lock it away in the long term. So if you can restore those habitats and increase their extent, then you're increasing the amount of carbon that's taken out of the atmosphere and locked away. But there are some other ways as well that carbon can be removed from the ocean and ultimately from the atmosphere, which one of them is through enhancing the populations of whales. So enormous whales, when they die and they sink to the bottom of the ocean, they take their carbon with them. And so if they are right at the bottom of the deep ocean, that carbon is locked away. So when there was a lot of industrial whaling and populations of whales were very, very badly decimated by that, then the amount of carbon being locked away was reduced. But as we protect whales and we look after them, and we don't subject them to lots of other impacts like underwater noise and pollution and so on, then we've got the scope to build up those populations and then build up the amount of carbon that they lock away. And so they're just, and then there's the carbon also stored in plankton is on a massive scale as well. And so one of the impacts of all the different threats that I've mentioned has been to reduce the overall amount of some types of plankton, which again reduces the amount of carbon that they can lock away. So that's a very, very quick introduction to blue carbon, but it really protecting blue carbon, that there are specific projects, like as I mentioned, with things like eelgrass bed restoration that can really be very focused on enhancing a particular type of blue carbon. But then the other argument is just the healthier and richer and more animal filled our oceans can be, the more blue carbon we can lock away. So it's a really great argument for just general good protection of the ocean as well. So building on what I've just been saying, restoration and rewilding is really important. And so, and as I said, things like restoring eelgrass beds, salt marshes, kelp forests and so on can be really important. And an example of this, of restoration, there's lots of restoration projects now going on in the UK. And one of them is of oyster reefs, which are very diverse, very important, and that's being done. It's a project that's sponsored by the Glenmorangie Whiskey Company, and they're investing in restoring their kind of local marine habitats. And oysters are something that we used to have in Manx waters, and it would be amazing to restore. And so if you can protect, I mentioned seagrass, these are some images of the seagrass we have around the Isle of Man. So if we can protect seagrass, then we can increase the amount of carbon that's locked down in their root systems. And you can see in that photo of the seagrass that's washed up on the beach that they have very dense and deep root systems. But you also get other benefits because they are a nursery ground for juvenile fish and shellfish. And they can stabilize sediments and stop them washing away, and there's a whole host of other uses. Horse mussel reefs are something that we've protected quite effectively in the Isle of Man. They're protected in our Marine Nature Reserve network, but they are also important for juvenile whelks, and they're very diverse, and they stabilize the seabed as well. So they have a whole range of other benefits. And merle, which again is a habitat we get around the Isle of Man, it's a type of seaweed, and this is incredibly diverse. It can have well over 600 species associated with it. And again, it's shown to be important for fisheries and for settlement habitat for some of the species that we fish in the Isle of Man, like queen scallops. So I've mentioned a bit about habitat protection, blue carbon protection, restoration, and rewilding. And one way to do this is through the use of marine protected areas. So this map shows as of 2022, the end of last year, the distribution of marine protected areas, so areas of the sea that are protected from damaging activities around the world. And the graph on the right shows how the number of marine protected areas has increased rapidly over the decades. And these areas, they bring back about a whole range of benefits from an ocean climate point of view, because you're allowing the habitats to restore naturally. You might need to intervene, or they might just restore over time as they're not impacted. And you can see biodiversity increasing, and the resilience of those systems increasing as well. So there's all sorts of benefits. And as I mentioned right at the beginning, you can also see benefits to fisheries, because they provide areas of sanctuary so that the species that are fish can thrive, and then they reseed the areas around them. So there's a whole range of benefits of protecting these areas as marine protected areas. It's becoming a big global movement to do that. I'm not going to go into what we've done in the Isle of Man, because I've realised I'm running out of time, but we have in the Isle of Man a network of 10 marine nature reserves in our coastal waters. So 52% of our coastal waters are now protected, and so that is part of that big global network that I showed you. And so that's a brilliant first step towards our ocean climate solutions around the Isle of Man, in protecting those areas from trawling and dredging, letting the habitats restore and rewild, and nurturing the blue carbon habitats like eelgrass, which most of which are protected within that network. So again, to find out more about that, I've put the link there for the brilliant resources that DEFRA and the Manx Wildlife Trust have produced on those marine nature reserves. And linked to that, the other network that we're part of is obviously the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve Network. And again, I'm sure you've heard more about that elsewhere, but it's important from a climate change point of view as well, that there's a lot of encouragement to kind of innovate in climate action as well. Just a couple of things that you might have heard of in the news that I just wanted to link into this quickly. Towards the end of last year, there was the announcement from the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which is a set of I think that 20 targets for nature conservation by 2030, and it builds on the Convention on Biological Diversity, which the Isle of Man is signed up to. And a key one from the point of view of some of the things I've been talking about is the target that to ensure that by 2030, at least 30% of marine areas are protected, are effectively conserved and managed. And so this is the kind of global mandate for 30% of our oceans being protected. And so the Isle of Man currently is just over 10, but that's all on our inshore waters. So the bar has now been raised. And even more recently, another really positive development for the ocean and for its function in helping us deal with climate change is the High Seas Treaty. And this is a really historic deal. It's literally been decades in the making, and it's a commitment to protecting the areas of sea that are outside national jurisdiction. So some people have described those areas as a sort of bit of a Wild West, where they weren't properly, nothing was properly managed because it wasn't part of any particular country. But now there's a really good framework, if it's properly adopted, to protect those areas. And also it means that they can be part of this global target to achieve 30% of the oceans protected by 2030. And it wouldn't have been possible to do that without this deal. So that's really exciting and really positive. So I've gone through this super quickly, and there's so many things that, each one of these topics you could talk about all evening. But in terms of how you can make a difference, learn about the ocean and love it. So I think a really good bit of advice is just to rediscover that childhood love of the sea. Everyone, loved going to the beach when they were children, and that real love and connection, and finding little crabs and lobsters, and it's magical. Protect what's left. We have to make sure that where we have got important marine habitats, that we look after them, we don't lose them. It's really difficult to restore a habitat properly. It's very difficult and expensive. Vote for people who care about the sea, about biodiversity and climate change, because many of the things that we need to do, they do need to be come from the government in terms of regulation and funding for effective conservation measures as well. Support the organisations that are working to save the ocean. Do what you can to cut your own emissions, being very conscious of that importance of global emissions reduction that we need, alongside all the nature-based solutions. Think about your own interactions with the ocean, and I mentioned before about it's not just industrial pollution, it's what we put down our toilets and our sinks as well that can impact, and also what fish we choose to eat, and so on. Whenever you get the opportunity, support highly protected marine protected areas. So that's where the areas are really well protected. There are some areas that are called marine protected areas, but they're not well protected. And have marine conversations, so talk about the sea. I've got a few more personal kind of ways you can help, and I suppose something that I've tried to do is become a marine habitat champion. So seagrass is having such an amazing moment in the limelight. It was very neglected for a long time, and now it's really getting a lot of attention. But there are lots of other habitats that aren't as kind of as loved and well known. So salt marsh, oyster reefs, deep water mud, they all need a voice. Find stories about the sea and marine conservation that resonate with you. There's so much good stuff coming out in books, films, arts, drama. Cherish and protect the wonderful marine life that we have. It's a really important step, as I've just mentioned. And I think remembering that we're not just doing this for ourselves and for future generations of the Isle of Man, we're doing it for the people around the world who are most impacted by climate change and by the ecological crisis, and also the marine species that don't have a voice. We need to speak for them. So just from a local perspective, I would say go to the beach, get to know the ocean on your doorstep. And I'm sure most of you do this, but it's really important that we appreciate that, and make sure that your local MHK or MLC knows that you care about marine life, climate change, and the well-being of future generations. Let's make it a top election issue in the future, because it needs to be. Support the local environmental organisations. They're doing a brilliant job. The Manx Wildlife Trust, Manx Whale and Dolphin Watch, Manx BirdLife, all these organisations are just they're making great things happen with quite limited resources often, and that if you can support them through membership or donations or volunteering or amplifying their message on social media, it's really important. And respond to government consultations that and raise, you know, any the concerns you have about marine conservation and climate change, because that message just needs to keep being repeated. And I'm sorry, inevitably I'm finishing on a little advert for a book that I've written about how much I love the sea around the Isle of Man, and how important it is that we save our ocean locally and globally for climate change and biodiversity and livelihoods and everyone's future. So if you're interested in finding more about this, then my book is available at the Bridge Bookshop and all good bookshops. But I feel like I've really flown through this. So my email's at the bottom, and if you have any specific questions or anything you'd like to find out more about, please do get in touch. And we can do some questions now as well. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. You fell for the typical speaker's thing, which you start off and then you realise the time and accelerate. But truly, you managed to provide so much information, and I'm still gobsmacked by some of those early statistics around, 90% of the ocean we still know so little about, but we certainly know a lot more following what you've just shared with us. Do we have any questions from anyone out there? Either turn your mic on or pop it in the chat. I've got a couple, but anything comes to mind that you want to check in? Because Fiona is wall-to-wall knowledge and ideas on this topic, so I don't think there'll be anything she couldn't answer if you challenged, or she couldn't respond to, I should say. Any questions? Well, I'm going to ask one. I can see there might be someone typing in there, which is, I think in a way you answered it towards the end there, because you set us the challenge of balancing information and facts with emotion. And of course, you hope that the love child of those two things is action. And so you kind of answered that question at the end by what you can do. And I guess challenge us to say, don't do nothing because you don't think you can do enough. I mean, each of those little actions will make a difference. But it is quite confronting, some of those statistics around what we have already done, and the arrogance perhaps with which we've done it. In recent generations. On the optimism, pessimism based on facts and emotions, where do you sit, Fiona?
I think it depends on the day. I think you've got to be hopeful. It's the only way, you can be in this, I think live in these times, but also work in anything environmental. I think there's great scope for the change that's needed to happen. And so you've got, I'm hopeful. But some days it can be difficult. And
the Isle of Man looks healthy with its reserves around it, and as that map showed, that we're certainly committed a lot to our marine reserves. But are we doing enough? Is there political will? Is there enough cash?
So I think the progress has been brilliant, and the kind of collaborative approach to make that progress has been brilliant. So the fishing industry have been really on board, and this has been a real community effort to get to where we are. And it's so much further on than I thought it would be possible when I started a long time ago trying to identify the first marine nature reserve. But I think in the context of some of the background that I gave right at the beginning, generally environmental protection generally, and marine conservation, it needs to be much higher up everyone's agenda. And I think the COVID situation was very unfortunate, I think, obviously globally from so many different reasons, but I think from the environmental protection point of view, it has really set the momentum back globally, in terms of the political priorities and economic priorities. And so I would say it needs a lot more resourcing and priority, and it does need to be at the heart of everything. But there is really there's things like the new not that new now, the Climate Change Act makes biodiversity protection statutory, as well as climate action for public bodies in the Isle of Man. And if those a lot of these things that we've got in place already in the island are properly implemented and resourced, then really good things could come out of that. But I would say it needs to be really up at the top of a lot more agendas, whereas it's still, and I think particularly the biodiversity side is often seen still as a bit of a kind of luxury extra, not as completely essential to everything. So
it's that investment in the long term rather than that what a lot of politics has become quite a populist short-term kind of game in many ways. We've got a question for Katrina about, do we need to do more to educate people about some of the less popular the less sexy species that are really important to protect. So the, I don't know, the small ugly things is that make that are really important, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think that general message about, you know, thinking about the whole ecosystem and that everything's got its role, and if you lose one thing, then you don't know what the knock-on effect will be, is really good to remember. And a really good example of that is mud. So, you know, in my work as a conservation officer over the years, I had real struggles with how do you get people excited or concerned or even remotely bothered about mud habitats. And so we have important mud habitats offshore, which are now receiving more attention, but they're really diverse. They're really important for carbon storage. They're really important for fisheries and for some really quite rare species. But you know, people don't get very excited about mud, but that is something that I know that people are working on now. But also, you know, the mud that we have in our estuaries, so the mud in Ramsey Harbour or the mud on Pool Dewey Nature Reserve, you know, Pool Dewey Salt Marsh in Ramsey, it's really important. Salt marsh is a really big climate hero, and it's not very exciting. Yeah, so I think a lot, you know, mud and worms and all these things are really, really important. Yeah, we probably do need to do a lot more, but you know, I think actually in schools children are much more aware of it. Yeah, I think maybe it's how you get decision makers more excited maybe about these things.
We can see that question, the good segue, Fiona, that's come in from Florida there. If you can read that one about, is there being enough done to engage high school students with these issues through different programs like DFE and work experience? I mean, there's probably always more we can do, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a huge amount about what's being done in high schools. I know, and I think Lara is on the call, but the Wildlife Trust do amazing work, outreach work and education work. And I know they do brilliant work in primary schools, but I don't know if Lara wants to come and talk about what's being done in high schools at all. Sorry to put you on the spot.
There is quite a bit being done. Our education officer, who's just stepped down actually, Dawn, was doing field studies work with secondary schools. I think with Peel was one of them. She does go into the secondary schools and talk to the students about that. And I think there's about to be a natural history GCSE about to be launched imminently as well. So it's all moving in the right direction, definitely.
Right.
Thank you, Laura. I should just, I'm sure most of you do know Laura, but Dr. Laura Howe's amazing marine officer from the Maxwell Wildlife Trust, and she's doing so much of this work that I've just been talking about. So
good to have you, Laura. And a question there, Fiona, from Paul. There you go. I know Paul. I'm sure you didn't mean to put sod your bit, but anyway, we know what you meant. Yeah,
that's brilliant. Yeah, sorry, I was just totally that's brilliant. Yeah, and you know, I know you've done so much around the curriculum and things. That's brilliant. It's really exciting.
See that one from JB there, Fiona? How do you raise the economic value of the sea? This is, I guess, it's something like almost like the green accounting approach, maybe. I don't know. Yeah,
and again, there's probably a lot of other people that could answer this better than me, but I think that this, I think it's the way things are going, and I think that kind of, there's a lot of work internationally and, you know, more locally in terms of that kind of thinking about the economic benefit of good environmental conservation and obviously climate action. And you know, the obvious ones, you know, the Isle of Man is the kind of link with fisheries, and I know there's some really good work going on in terms of looking at the fisheries benefits of conservation measures and things like that. So but I'm sure there's lots more scope, and maybe again with I don't know if Laura wants to say something about the brilliant seagrass initiative, because I guess that's kind of, you know, it's bringing together different communities as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also bringing the corporates community into things as well. So some of the work that we've been doing is linked with all the ESG work that's going on. So we've just had a partnership set up with KPMG to help MEG, which is our Manx eelgrass group, go forward in terms of monitoring our seagrass meadows around the Isle of Man, in terms of really mapping them and looking at the abundance of species that are found with them, and helping to support the DEFA Blue Carbon project, helping with some ground truthing through diving, and helping with them to calculate carbon sequestration in our seagrass.
Yeah, it's we're coming to the end, and we do finish on time because I'm sure lots of people can smell their tea in the oven or something. But I think that question, and I don't, JB, I don't know what your name is, but I think it's a really interesting one, because I'm conflicted about trying to make what's confronting us fit into the economic systems that have pretty much caused the problems in the first place, because they're based on consumption and growth and et cetera, et cetera. But I suppose we have to make the effort to express these issues in terms that the corporates and the big businesses will be able to take advantage of, for want of a better word. There's a part of me just wishes we, as you've used the word, we just have a completely new system about what we value, and not just be restricted to money value and market forces, which may be not what you meant, JB, but it's what you made me think about.
No, it is, and that's
yeah.
Sorry. You can't just suddenly switch this over. So the entire industrial system is based on leveraging debt and exploitation. Fact. No, you can't move away from that just overnight and switch it to a new system. Otherwise, there'll be mass poverty and confusion and anarchy and war, and that's kind of the opposite end of that spectrum. So it's just more a matter of, with the Isle of Man, given the nation status, there is an opportunity to lead in this, and I just wondered if there is any examples of us leading globally with creating economic examples. And Lara, you touched on the one that I'm going to follow up on with the KPMG Manx eelgrass. So I'm looking for examples really, rather than theory and catastrophic end of the world moments. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so well, we've started something, and thank you, Fiona, very much for your time. And as I say, this is recorded, so those magnificent visuals, I mean, they were quite beautiful, some of them, even though the story they told was perhaps a little bit sadness. So this will be available on the UCM website shortly if you want to go back and reference some of the visuals, as well as the words that Fiona's given us. And I'm certainly inspired that some of the smaller and simpler things do make a difference, as long as you pursue them relentlessly. I think that's the message that we've come through here. So thank you very, very much, Dr. Fiona Gell, and for everyone that's been in the room tonight, and wish you a very good evening. And please check out the UCM website around UCM Talks for what's coming up, but also what's been, and the recordings of the talks that we've had over the years. All right, thank you very much, everyone. Take care, and a huge thank you to Dr. Fiona Gell.
Thank you. Good night.